Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human Condition podcast. The human condition is such a broad term that there isn't really one condition that can best describe what it is to be human. Some traditions, like Buddhism, have tried to encapsulate the human condition into one thing, like dukkha or suffering, which to them acts as a background in our portrait of existence. To them, it is in order to escape this suffering that we drown ourselves in colorful desires like drugs, alcohol, shopping, entertainment, and so on. Although it is quite appealing, I still don't think it does justice to the entirety of the human condition. So I thought of starting off the podcast with a human condition that is ubiquitous and universal. Something that all of us experience. Well, at first, two things occurred to me instantly: suffering and humor. I'm a big fan of both of these, but I decided to go with humor. So today we discuss humor, what makes us laugh, why we laugh, the morality of humor, and some theories of humor. Humor, like I mentioned, is a ubiquitous phenomenon. We all experience it. When people are asked what's important in their lives, a very common answer is humor. When couples are asked what made them attracted to their significant other, one of the most common characteristic mentioned is a sense of humor. I mean, think about it. Ask yourself this question. If you have a partner or if you're seeking a partner, how important is a good sense of humor? I think it's pretty important. And this is not surprising because humor is an integral part of our life, and laughter being elicited by humor is probably a condition that is almost as old as humanity itself. But I just want to make a little point here that humor is different from comedy. I won't stress on this too much, but I think it's important to understand that comedy is simply an art form. It is a way of performing that elicits amusement or laughter from people. Humor, on the other hand, is what makes something funny and the quality in something that makes it funny or humorous. That being said, think about your favorite joke or a joke that makes you laugh and think why it does that. Well, there are a couple of theories that we'll go over today, and maybe something will seem appealing to you. We'll also look at the morality of humor and see if it's true that people with a moral mindset are less appreciative of humor. Okay, so here's a joke. Gabriel Sherman asks Trump what the J in his name, Donald J. Trump, stands for. Genius, replies Trump. Now, why is this joke funny, if it is funny? Well, the short answer, according to one of the theories, is because you feel superior to Trump. One of the earliest theories of humor, which was proposed by people like Thomas Hobbes and Descartes, was the superiority theory of humor. It's a psychological theory of humor that was agreed upon as the reason for why people laugh for a long time. We now give this theory a name called the superiority theory. Basically, the theory says that when we laugh at a joke, our laughter is directed at the person who is the object of the joke, and we laugh because we feel superior to this person. So this portrays humor as a derogatory form of behavior. In this particular joke, we feel superior to Donald Trump and hence we laugh at him, which is what makes this joke funny. But this theory has a clear problem, which is that sometimes we laugh at ourselves. Look at self-deprecatory humor, for example. These are remarks that target oneself as the object of humor. There are a lot of memes that are self-deprecating, and we tend to get a good laugh out of them. I'm sure you've come across some of these. There's even a subreddit with over 2 million people called Roast Me, where people just post pictures of themselves and ask to get roasted. If you guys don't know about it, let me tell you, it is brutal. And people get a good laugh out of this just laughing at themselves. Now this is weird in the context of the superiority theory because that would mean we feel superior to ourselves. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There are also other kinds of jokes that the superiority theory fails to explain. For example, interpretational jokes. These are jokes that need some kind of interpretation in order to understand the joke. They have a narrower scope as they can only be understood by people with certain knowledge. Like this one, for example. I asked my father for $10 to invest in Bitcoin. He said, $9.85? What do you need $10.24 for? You're too young to be investing $9.40 in Bitcoin. The interpretation here is that Bitcoin is a volatile currency and is constantly changing. So you need to have access to this subset of information to get the joke. But this is something the superiority theory fails to explain, just like many other inside jokes which are only funny to the group of people who have whatever that inside knowledge is. So what other theories have been put forth to explain humor? Well, there are quite a few, and it would take a long time to go through each one of them, so I will leave the footnotes to the episode on the website where you can find the material and the references, but I'm going to go over what I think is the theory of humor that can explain a lot of stuff, and one that I particularly am inclined towards. This is the incongruity theory of humor. There are variations in the incongruity theory of humor as well, but basically, the theory says that humor arises because of the perception of something incongruous, something that violates our mental perceptions. To put it more roughly, it says humor arises because we have been expecting something given the context of what is known to us, and eventually something unexpected is said or happens that is incongruous to what our mind has been perceiving. This, the theory says, is what makes something funny. This was immediately very appealing to me because it explains so many types of humor: sarcasm, interpretational jokes, satire, demeaning jokes, puns, and so on. This is most clearly observed when stand-up comedians go about their job when they have a setup and a punchline. The setup is basically setting us up for a framework within which we are expecting something from the comedian, but the punchline delivers something unexpected, and this comes across as an incongruence to our brain, hence making us laugh. I know that breaking humor down like this kind of takes the fun out of humor in a way, but I want to go ahead and see what the implications of something like the incongruity theory are. For example, a common criticism stand-up comedians face is that their jokes are offensive. Many comedians have been booed off stage and heckled mercilessly because their jokes were offensive to someone or some group in the audience. Shows like South Park, Family Guy, and Ali G, or films like Borat, or my personal favorites, Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Life of Brian, all elicit openly offensive acts and statements against revered people and religions, and also racist comments that understandably get a lot of criticism. But if we take these shows and films to be made in service of comedy and with an obvious ironic tone, why should it be morally reprehensible? For all we know, the incongruity theory assumes that we only find humor when our perceptions are incongruent with what has been said. This would mean that someone with a moral mindset would actually find something like racial comedy funny because of the incongruence it produces within their mind. It's because they find racism or sexism or anything derogatory as something opposing to their beliefs. So let's go over the morality of humor now. I'm not going to make any conclusive statements on the morality of humor because, well, it's not so simple. But I think we can find some coherent ground. Plato in his Philebus mentions that laughter is a form of malice, which he compares along the lines of sadism. He says that in comedy, we take pleasure in the misfortune of others through either their ignorance or incompetency. He turned a critical eye towards the pleasures of humor. But is there something really morally reprehensible about comedy? What do you think? I mean, comedy also serves other purposes other than simply laughter or pleasure. I mean, in the old days, in the king's court, for example, no one would dare make fun of the king or the king's rule except the comedian. It was obvious that it was a joke, so the king can't have him killed. Because what kind of a king is a king who can't take a joke, right? He would lose the respect of his people. So the comedian was, in a way, a critic who stands as a representative of the society within the king's court. There are also other people, like the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who had views against humor. He also advises people to refrain from telling jokes because it would lead to vulgarity, which may result in your esteem being lowered in the eyes of others. Someone like Baudelaire takes it even a step further and says laughter is a satanic expression of our superiority over beasts and a frustration at our mere mortality. Overall, the underlying assumption that is common to all of these seems to be that it is cruel to take pleasure in the suffering of others. I believe there is a befitting German word for this called Schadenfreude, but this is not what humor is. Far from it. Let's get back to something like South Park or Sacha Baron Cohen's comedies or even Comedy Central's Key and Peele skits, for example. These shows very casually display racist or sexist tones, clearly in service of comedy with an obviously ironic tone. From what we have known from the incongruity theory, if we do find something like this funny, shouldn't it say something about how incongruous our minds find it to perceive something like racism or sexism? In an age where political correctness is taken so seriously, only someone that is very secure about their lack of racism or sexism could produce something like this because they understand how ridiculous racism or sexism is. The same goes with people who find something like this funny. I think people who find something truly funny, truly in the spirit of comedy, have nothing morally reprehensible about them. Of course, we have people who disagree with this. D'Souza, in 1987, put forth something called the attitude endorsement theory. He claims that getting a joke is different from finding a joke funny. In order to get the joke, we just need to presume the underlying proposition. But to find a joke funny, one needs to have some level of positive endorsement towards the propositions in the joke. If this is true, then our sense of humor can be a real judge in saying how virtuous we are and how morally good we are. For example, if you find a racial joke funny, that means you have some level of abhorrence towards that race and you endorse that proposition to some level, and that is why you found that joke funny. But the problem with this theory is that we don't actually have to be sexist or racist or having whatever attitude that would make the joke funny. We only need to adopt this particular attitude for a moment in order to find that joke amusing. I only need to suspend my judgments about something for that moment to find it amusing. This idea of suspending our judgments or suspending our values for the moment, I think is quite interesting. It's like theater, when the performance is happening, you suspend some pre-established notions in order to just enjoy the act. Even the performers do this. They suspend their own identity and embody another personality for the sake of the performance. Why can't the same be applicable to humor? I believe comedy should be considered as a sphere of performance in which the actors and viewers, or in this case, the comedian and the audience, should suspend their values and judgments in order to enjoy the humor or the performance. But this has to produce some value, just like a good theatrical performance does. Humor has always been providing value in our society. Making fun of something wrong that's going on in the society is a healthy way of dealing with a problem and to even recognize that there is a problem. This is why dictators are not very fond of comedians or people who make fun of them. They cannot imagine their power being downplayed by a mere comedian. But comedy serves a purpose in the society. It is by suspension of values and judgments and engaging in this realm that we seek new things that may be lost in our original value system, which we never found because we never sought it due to our value system being too rigid. I'm sure you've met people like this who are too rigid and stubborn in their beliefs and they're 100% sure about it. There is nothing wrong with being strong about your beliefs, but just don't be 100% sure about them, man. Leave a little gap for humility's sake, bro. In this sense, comedians provide us with a new perspective. They engage us in different values for the duration of their performance. Now, where does this leave us with the ethics of dark humor? I personally enjoy Holocaust jokes, so does that say anything about my morality? Is everything permissible just because you decided to create a space in which morals and values are suspended in the middle of your friend's mother's funeral? Well, clearly not. I always have trouble discussing this with people because everyone has gone through some tough shit, right? They have people close to them who have suffered from something terrible, or maybe they knew people who have gone through some terrible circumstances, and joking about that issue could put them off, and they may not feel very comfortable with that situation. I would of course never joke with someone about an incident that has caused them pain or grievance. Well, unless I know that the joke doesn't upset him or her too much. My grandfather passed due to lung cancer because he smoked way too much. I would never joke about this to my grandmom or even any of my family members for that matter. It's been over 12 years since he passed, and I don't think there is ever a good time to make a cancer joke in one of my family gatherings. So, where do we stand between suspension of values and the humanity of joke telling? Because that is the big question here, right? Where do we draw the line? I think there is no simple answer to that. There aren't gonna be situations that come to you labeled as jokeable or not jokeable. You just have to make good judgments about it and have good joke acumen, I guess. But of course, in a setting that is totally intended for the purpose of comedy, like a stand-up comedy show or a comedy movie for that matter, I think it is permissible to suspend values in that particular setting because after all, that is the aim of it. I'll see you next time with a different topic.